She was my landlady, elegant, untouchable, twice my age. But the night she whispered, "Stay tonight, but don't expect to sleep," nothing between us felt the same again. I never expected the evening to stretch the way it did. It was past 10 when I climbed the narrow steps to the porch, the weight of the day pressing down on my shoulders. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the sky had been dry for hours, and the neighborhood was wrapped in the kind of quiet that only comes after most lights have gone out. I was ready to retreat into the small side room I rented from her, just to collapse and forget the day. But she was waiting for me. She stood at the doorway of the main house, framed by the warm amber glow of a single lamp behind her. My landlady, 42, refined in a way that felt effortless, leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, her silk robe tied loosely at the waist. The fabric caught the light, shimmering with every slight movement. Her hair, dark with a few strands touched by silver, was swept back carelessly, as though she had given up on perfection for the night. Still, she looked beautiful, the kind of beautiful that carried both elegance and the quiet trace of weariness. "You shouldn't go out there tonight," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper that broke the silence of the street. Then, after a pause that lingered longer than necessary, she added, "Stay here. Inside." The words were simple, but the way they left her lips made them heavy with something unspoken. I froze, caught off guard. She had never invited me into her living space before, not like this. Our relationship had always been marked by polite exchanges, the rent envelope left on the counter, the occasional neighborly smile, a few shared words in passing. But tonight, her eyes didn't carry the usual distance. They held me. I nodded, stepping toward her. My footsteps fell too loud against the wooden porch, every creak of the boards echoing in my chest. As I passed her, the faint scent of jasmine brushed against me, subtle yet unmistakable, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Inside, the house felt different at this hour. The living room, usually bright with daylight, was now softened by shadows and golden pools of lamplight. It felt less like a landlord's home and more like an intimate space, private, personal, alive with stories never told. I hesitated near the door, uncertain if I belonged, but she only tilted her head slightly, her eyes still fixed on me. "Stay tonight," she repeated, quieter this time. Her tone wasn't commanding, nor casual, it was something in between, a plea carefully disguised as an offer. And in that instant, standing beneath the warm light of her home, I realized this night would be different. The door closed softly behind me, sealing us in from the stillness of the street. Inside, her house carried an entirely different rhythm at night. During the day, I'd seen this room as practical, books neatly stacked, curtains drawn wide, sunlight spilling across the furniture. But now, bathed in dim light and the flicker of candles set along a low table, it felt like an entirely different world. A secret world. She moved with quiet assurance, the soft swish of her robe marking her steps across the polished floor. "Sit," she murmured, motioning to the sofa as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Yet nothing about this moment felt ordinary. The air seemed to hum faintly, charged with something unnamed. I obeyed, lowering myself into the cushions, my body taut with awareness. She poured wine into two slender glasses, her movements unhurried. When she turned to hand me mine, her fingers brushed lightly against my knuckles. It was a fleeting contact, just skin meeting skin, but the sensation lingered, a faint spark that made my pulse stumble. I forced myself to meet her eyes. They were softer now, touched by an expression I couldn't quite name. Vulnerable, perhaps, or maybe just tired. But even in that tiredness, there was grace. She sat beside me, not too close, yet not leaving the comfortable distance one might expect. The sofa dipped beneath her weight, and the space between us suddenly felt charged, fragile as glass. We spoke, at first, of ordinary things, the weather, the neighbors, the odd quiet of the night. But the conversation slipped, as if guided by invisible hands, into something deeper. She admitted she hated evenings when the silence pressed too heavily against the walls. I confessed that sometimes I stayed out longer than I should just to avoid the loneliness waiting in my own room. Our voices softened, the pauses between sentences stretching, filling with something that words couldn't carry. I noticed the way her eyes glinted in the candlelight, the curve of her lips as she listened, the delicate rise and fall of her breathing. At one point, she laughed, low, almost hesitant, as though she had forgotten what it felt like. And in that laugh, I heard more than amusement. I heard a crack in the careful armor she always wore. I found myself smiling too, though my chest ached with an awareness I dared not name. Her hand rested on the edge of the sofa cushion, fingers just inches from mine. I didn't move closer, but I also didn't move away. The fire in the hearth shifted, sending a ripple of warmth across the room. And in that moment, sitting side by side, sipping wine beneath the gentle hush of shadows, I knew something had begun. Something neither of us had expected, yet neither of us wanted to stop. The fire had burned lower, its glow reduced to a steady pulse of orange, shadows stretching long against the walls. Our conversation drifted into a quiet lull, the kind that holds more weight than words ever could. She leaned back into the sofa, her glass cradled loosely in her hand, gaze fixed on the flicker of the flames as though searching for answers there. "I don't sleep well," she said finally, her voice no louder than the crackle of the wood. "Most nights, I just wander the house. I think too much." Her lips curved in a self-conscious smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "It's silly, isn't it? This place is too big for one person, but I stay anyway. Some nights the silence feels like it's pressing in from every corner." I didn't speak right away. I wanted to give her space, to let her words breathe. There was something in her tone, a quiet confession, that deserved more than a quick reply. She glanced at me then, as though to check if I understood, and for a moment, I saw past the polished exterior she wore each day. The confident landlady, the graceful woman, all of it slipped, revealing the ache beneath. "You're not silly," I said softly. "Silence can be louder than anything." Her shoulders relaxed, just slightly, as if my words had given her permission to stop pretending. She set her glass down on the table with deliberate care, then folded her hands in her lap. "Sometimes," she whispered, "I wonder if I've built walls so high, I don't even know how to step over them anymore." The honesty of it cut through me. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone, that I had felt those walls too, different, maybe, but just as isolating. Instead, I shifted closer, not too much, just enough that the warmth of my presence might bridge the distance her words had created. A strand of hair slipped forward, falling against her cheek. Without thinking, I reached out, brushing it gently back behind her ear. My fingers grazed her temple, feather-light, yet in that single touch, something unspoken passed between us. She froze, not pulling away, but not leaning in either. Her eyes lifted to mine, and I held them, refusing to let the moment dissolve into awkwardness. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed, her steady breathing, the faint tick of the clock, the glow painting her features with soft shadows. And in that stillness, we weren't landlady and tenant anymore. We were simply two people, both weary, both yearning for something they hadn't dared name aloud. And as she exhaled, I felt it, the shift. The quiet acknowledgement that tonight was not about sleep at all. The minutes bled into each other, the house wrapped in a hushed stillness. Outside, a breeze rattled faintly against the windows, but in here the only sound was the fire's low hum. She shifted slightly, curling her legs onto the sofa, tucking them beneath her. The movement brought her closer, her silk robe brushing softly against my arm. It was nothing, really, just fabric against fabric. But in the charged quiet, it felt like more. My breath caught, the awareness of her presence sharper now. Her knee rested against mine, light and unintentional, yet neither of us moved to create space. The warmth seeped through the thin layers of clothing, a constant reminder of how near she was. Her glass was empty, set aside on the low table. She drew her robe tighter, though I could still see the delicate line of her collarbone, faintly illuminated by candlelight. I glanced at her, and she must have felt it, because her eyes lifted to mine in the same moment. The pause that followed stretched thin, like a string pulled taut. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that wasn't meant to charm but simply revealed something unguarded. "It feels strange," she said quietly, "having someone else here, at this hour." "Strange good?" I asked, my voice hushed, though the closeness of the room made it feel as though I'd spoken louder. Her gaze flickered to where our knees touched, then back to my face. "Strange, necessary." Her choice of words sank into me, heavier than I expected. Necessary. I shifted, turning slightly so I could face her more fully. The distance between us now was hardly more than a breath, our hands resting on the same cushion, only inches apart. I could see the way her fingers trembled slightly, though she tried to still them. The conversation faltered. Words no longer seemed capable of holding the weight of the moment. Instead, it was the silence, the unspoken electricity, that bound us. Her eyes lingered on my lips for the briefest heartbeat before darting back to mine, a flicker so quick I might have imagined it. But I hadn't. I wanted to close the space, to erase the fragile line between us. Yet some instinct held me back, knowing the beauty of this night lay in its patience. So I didn't move. Neither did she. Instead, I let my hand drift slowly, carefully, until it hovered close to hers. The warmth of her skin radiated across the small gap, almost like a touch before it happened. She noticed. Her breath hitched, her lips parting ever so slightly. The moment wasn't explosive, it was delicate, almost fragile. But it was real. And sitting there, close enough to feel her warmth, I knew the night was leading us somewhere neither of us had planned, yet neither of us wished to escape. The fire had quieted to embers, their glow washing the room in faint red light. Every shadow seemed to lean closer, like the night itself was holding its breath with us. She sat angled toward me now, one hand resting lightly on her lap, the other brushing against my forearm as if it had found its way there without permission. Her touch was feather-light, almost accidental. Yet it lingered. I felt every heartbeat in the tips of her fingers, each one echoing into me. I turned my head, meeting her gaze. Her eyes didn't look away. They held mine, steady, yet full of something trembling just beneath the surface, fear, desire, maybe both. I shifted closer, closing what little distance remained. The warmth of her body reached me first, then her breath, soft, uneven, carrying the faint taste of wine. My chest tightened. Her hand on my arm tightened too, the smallest squeeze, as though anchoring herself to the moment. For a heartbeat, nothing existed but the space between our lips. So close, I could see the curve of her mouth, the way her lower lip trembled just slightly. My pulse roared in my ears, my thoughts scattering. I wanted to kiss her, God, I wanted to, but hesitation rooted me in place. Was this too far? Was it something she'd regret the second it happened? She leaned forward first, just barely, her eyes fluttering half-closed. My breath caught, anticipation rushing through me like a tide. Our lips hovered a whisper apart, the tension straining so tightly it almost hurt. And then, she pulled back. It wasn't abrupt, but slow, deliberate, like someone who had come too close to stepping off a ledge. Her hand slipped away from my arm, though not completely. She let her fingertips trail against me before retreating to the safety of her lap. Her lips curved, though not in dismissal. It was a smile that carried both mischief and a deep, unspoken confession. "Don't expect to sleep," she whispered, her voice low, trembling at the edges. The word struck me harder than a kiss would have. Half warning, half promise. A confession wrapped in playfulness, yet threaded with fear. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I only watched her, the firelight painting her profile in gold and shadow, the weight of her words pressing into me. My heart pounded, not from disappointment, but from the knowledge that this story wasn't over. She had stopped the kiss, yes, but she had also left the door open. And somehow, that was even more intoxicating. The silence after her words was thick, humming with everything unspoken. I sat there, still, trying to steady my breath, while she lowered her gaze to the floor as if embarrassed by her own daring. The mischief in her smile had faded, replaced by a flicker of vulnerability, as though she wasn't sure if she'd revealed too much. I didn't let her sit in that uncertainty. Slowly, carefully, I reached for her hand again. My fingers brushed against hers, tentative at first, until I felt the soft give of her palm opening to meet mine. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, her hand folded into mine with a quiet sigh, her thumb resting lightly against my skin. Her eyes lifted, meeting mine with a question she didn't voice. I answered it not with words, but with closeness. I leaned in, not fast, not hungry, but steady, deliberate, letting her see every movement before it happened. She shifted too, almost instinctively, her body turning toward me as though drawn by something beyond her control. When her head came to rest against my chest, the moment changed. No teasing, no hesitation, just honesty. I wrapped my arms around her, loosely at first, then with more certainty when I felt her relax into the hold. She exhaled against me, her breath warming through the thin fabric of my shirt, and for the first time all night, she seemed at peace. The rhythm of her heartbeat pressed into me, steady but faintly quickened, matching the uneven beat of my own. I let my chin rest lightly against the crown of her head, breathing in the faint scent of her hair, jasmine and something warmer, uniquely her. She spoke after a long pause, her words muffled against my chest. It's been so long since I've let someone close like this. I didn't rush to answer. My thumb traced slow circles along the back of her hand, grounding both of us in the simplicity of the moment. Finally, I whispered, then maybe it's long overdue. Her shoulders softened, her weight leaning more fully into me. We didn't need to fill the silence anymore. The room seemed to cocoon us, the world beyond the walls fading until there was only the crackle of the fire, the warmth of her body pressed close, and the shared understanding that neither of us wanted to be anywhere else. We weren't rushing. We weren't chasing. We were simply being, two people who had stopped fighting the pull of their own loneliness, finding comfort in each other's presence. And in that quiet embrace, I realized, sometimes the most powerful intimacy isn't found in passion, but in the simple act of holding someone who no longer wants to stand alone. Time lost its edges as we stayed there together, wrapped in the hush of the house. The fire dwindled to a faint glow, the wine glasses sat forgotten on the table, and still neither of us moved. It wasn't sleep we needed, not tonight. It was this, quiet closeness, unguarded and real. At some point, she reached for the throw blanket draped over the back of the sofa. Without speaking, she spread it over us both, cocooning us in warmth. Her hand brushed my shoulder as she tucked the fabric around me, the gesture tender in its simplicity. I smiled at the touch, and she must have felt it, because a small, almost shy smile curved her lips in return. We lay back, side by side, her head resting lightly against my chest. The blanket held our warmth, but it was the nearness, the feel of her breath against me, the way her hand found mine beneath the folds, that truly kept the cold away. We spoke in whispers, the kind of late-night confessions that only slip out when the world is dark and safe. She told me about the dreams she once had but never chased, about the moments she let slip past her because she thought she had more time. I told her about my restlessness, my uncertainty, the way I often felt caught between who I was supposed to be and who I actually was. She listened with a softness that made me feel seen, truly seen. Every now and then she would laugh, quiet, throaty, a sound that carried both sadness and relief, and the sound filled the room more completely than any firelight could. Neither of us spoke of what this meant, or what tomorrow would hold. That wasn't what the night asked for. It wasn't about labels or promises. It was about presence. About two people who had found, however unexpectedly, a moment of peace in each other. The hours slipped by, but neither of us closed our eyes. We weren't restless, we simply didn't want to miss a second. The night wasn't for sleep, it was for remembering what it felt like to belong somewhere, even if just in someone's arms. When dawn finally crept through the curtains, the first rays of sunlight touched her face where it rested against me. She stirred, blinking slowly, but she didn't move away. Instead, she sighed, a sound of quiet contentment, and nestled closer. And in that moment, as the new day spilled into the room, I realized she was right. We hadn't slept. But for the first time in a long while, we had finally rested.